My hands went completely still the moment I read the folded paper. Your husband is not who you think he is. Check the gray toolbox in the garage. I did. God help you. My breath left my body in one slow, hollow exhale. The handwriting was rushed, slanted hard to the right like whoever wrote it was shaking. The paper itself had been tucked behind the fuse box panel in the hallway. The one our electrician, a quiet older man named Roy, had been working on all last week before my husband fired him without warning on Friday afternoon. My name is Maya Chen. I am 31 years old. I have been married to Victor for 4 years. And until 30 seconds ago, I truly believed that my marriage, though strained and distant lately, was fundamentally built on honesty. I stood in the hallway a long time. Long enough for the air conditioning to click on and off again. Long enough for the afternoon light to shift from gold to pale gray through the front windows. I kept reading the note. 7 words that should not have meant anything. 7 words that unraveled everything. Victor had fired Roy on a Friday, which was strange. Roy was meticulous and kind. He had rewired our entire garage panel, replaced 3 faulty outlets in the kitchen, and never once overcharged us. When I'd asked Victor why he let him go, he shrugged without looking up from his laptop. Said Roy was slow and asking too many questions. I didn't press. I should have pressed. Now I was staring at a dead man's warning written on a torn piece of notebook paper, and every quiet alarm inside me was screaming at once. The garage was connected to the house through a side door off the kitchen. I had almost no reason to go in there. Victor stored his tools, his golf clubs he never used, 2 boxes of files from an old job, and a freestanding steel shelving unit along the back wall. I never paid that room much attention. It was his space in the way that the craft room upstairs was mine, unspoken territory that neither of us crossed without a reason. I had a reason now. The gray toolbox was on the bottom shelf, pushed to the back behind a cardboard box. I had seen it 100 times and never thought twice. It was a standard metal rolling chest, the kind you buy at any hardware store. It had a small padlock through the handle. I stood there looking at it. My fingers were cold. The garage smelled like motor oil and dust, and the single fluorescent light above me buzzed with a frequency that felt like it was vibrating inside my skull. I went back into the house and found Victor's spare keys in the kitchen junk drawer. He kept a small ring of miscellaneous keys there, copies of old locks, keys to storage units long since emptied, a car key for a vehicle he'd sold 2 years ago. Third one I tried opened the padlock. I lifted the lid. Inside was a burner phone, a dark blue passport that was not American, a thick envelope, and a photograph. I picked up the photograph first. It was Victor. Younger, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but unmistakably him. He was standing in front of a house, a small yellow house with a red door and flower boxes under the windows, and he had his arm around a woman I had never seen in my life. She was dark-haired and laughing at something off camera, her head tilted back, completely at ease. And at their feet, sitting on the front porch step, was a small boy. Maybe 4 years old. Sandy blonde hair, Victor's jaw, Victor's exact eyes looking up at the camera. My vision went white at the edges. I set the photograph down and opened the envelope. Inside were documents, a lease agreement for a property in Scottsdale, Arizona, signed by a Victor Marin. Not Victor Harlow, the name on our marriage certificate. Victor Marin. A different last name. The same face. The same hands I had held at our wedding in front of 43 people. There were bank statements folded inside the lease. An account I had never seen, under the name Marin, with a balance that made my stomach drop. $58,000. Deposits made consistently, bi-weekly, for the last 3 years. The exact same schedule as Victor's paychecks from his firm. He had been splitting his income. Half to us, half to them. I picked up the burner phone. It was powered off. I pressed the side button and held it, and the screen blinked slowly to life. No passcode. Either he felt safe or he was careless. I went to the messages. The most recent thread was labeled only with a heart emoji and a letter. C. The last message was from 11 days ago. Victor had written, Tell the school the check will be late. I'm restructuring things on this end. Almost done. By November we'll be clear. Clear. He was restructuring. He was almost done. I did not know what almost done meant, and I was terrified to find out. I put everything back exactly as I had found it. Locked the toolbox, pushed it to the back of the shelf. Walked back into the kitchen and sat down at the table and stared at the wall for a long time. When Victor texted me that evening to say he'd be home late, I texted back, "No problem. I'll save you dinner." The words came out of my fingers like they belonged to someone else. Someone very calm. Someone who did not currently feel like the floor beneath her life had turned to water. That night, I lay beside my husband in our bed and listened to him breathe. He fell asleep within minutes the way he always did, loose and unbothered. I watched the ceiling for 4 hours. I thought about the little boy in the photograph with Victor's eyes. I thought about the woman laughing in front of the yellow house. I thought about what by November will be clear meant, and the more I thought about it, the colder I became. Clear of what? Of us? Of this house? Of me? By 3 in the morning, I was not sad anymore. I was something much quieter and much more dangerous than sad. I went downstairs. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table, and I started searching. It took less than 2 hours to find her. The woman in the photograph was named Caroline Marin. She lived in Scottsdale. She had a public Facebook account. Her profile picture was a school photo of the boy. His name was Eli, and he had just turned 5. In the photo, he was wearing a collared shirt and grinning with a gap where a front tooth used to be. He had Victor's chin and Victor's nose and a laugh in his eyes that, under any other circumstances, would have been impossible not to smile at. I sat with that photo for a long time. Then I found something else. A LinkedIn profile under the name Victor Marin. It listed his employer as the same engineering firm where my husband, Victor Harlow, had worked for 7 years. Same job title. Same industry specialization. He had been living one life with 2 names, and apparently no one at his office had ever found a reason to look closely enough. I found the property records for the Scottsdale address. Victor Marin had purchased that house 3 years ago. Our house, the house I lived in, the house I had helped pick out, the house where I kept a vegetable garden in the backyard and painted the living room walls twice because the first color wasn't right was in both our names. And then I found it. Buried in a county record search I had to dig through 3 separate websites to access. Victor had filed a quitclaim deed 6 weeks ago. A document that, if I had signed it, would have transferred my share of our home entirely into his name. I had never signed any such document. My name on the deed was a forgery. I stared at that page for a very long time. Then I closed the laptop, walked upstairs, stood in the doorway of our bedroom and looked at the shape of my husband sleeping in our bed. He was on his side, facing away from me, one arm draped over my empty pillow. He looked exactly the same as he had every morning for 4 years. I had made coffee for this man. I had driven him to the airport when he had early flights and picked him up when they were delayed. I had sat with him in the ER when he had a kidney stone and held his hand and told him it was going to be okay. And the whole time he had been somewhere else entirely. I did not go back to sleep. The next morning, I waited until Victor left for work. He kissed my cheek at the door, smelled like his usual aftershave, said he'd try to make it home for dinner. I smiled and said that sounded great. The moment his car turned out of the driveway, I exhaled so hard I had to press my hand to the counter to steady myself. Then I moved. First, I went back to the toolbox and photographed every document inside it. The passport, the lease, the bank statements, the photograph. I photographed the burner phone screen, scrolling through every message thread. Then I locked everything back and left it exactly as I found it. Second, I called my sister. Not to tell her everything, not yet, but because she was a paralegal at a firm in Phoenix and had been quietly suggesting for the past year that something felt off about Victor. I hadn't listened. I asked her for the name of the best family law attorney she knew, someone who handled fraud and asset concealment. She gave me 2 names without asking a single question, and I loved her so much in that moment I had to breathe through my nose to keep from crying. Third, I made an appointment for that afternoon. I said it was urgent. The receptionist heard something in my voice and said they could fit me in at 2. The attorney's name was Patricia Voss. She was in her 50s, had short silver hair and very direct eyes, and she listened to everything I told her without interrupting once. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The quitclaim forgery alone is a felony. The bigamy, if it can be proven, is a separate criminal matter. The hidden account, depending on how the funds were sourced, could be wire fraud. You have a very strong case, Maya. The question is whether you want to pursue this carefully and completely, or quickly." I said I wanted it done right. She nodded. She told me what to do and what not to do. She told me not to move money, not to confront him, not to change my behavior in any way. She told me to gather as much documentation as I could access without breaking into anything and to be very careful about how I did it. I told her about Roy, about the note, about the fact that Roy had clearly seen something in that garage, something that disturbed him enough to risk leaving a warning for a woman he barely knew. Patricia wrote his name down. She said she might want to speak with him. I left that office with a folder of intake forms and something I had not felt in 24 hours. A direction. The following 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. I cooked dinner and asked about Victor's day and listened to him talk about projects at work and a colleague's retirement party he had to attend. I folded his laundry. I watched him pour himself a glass of wine and sit in the armchair reading on his phone, and I wondered which life he was reading about. Which calendar he was checking. Whether Caroline was putting Eli to bed right now, in the yellow house with the red door, in Scottsdale. Whether she was waiting for a text from Victor Marin that said goodnight the same way I used to wait for one from Victor Harlow when he worked late. I wondered if she knew about me. I doubted it. What kept me steady was the work. Every few days, Patricia gave me a task. I accessed our joint financial accounts fully legal. My name was on all of them and documented every transfer, every withdrawal, every pattern. I pulled our tax returns for the last 4 years and found discrepancies the IRS had not yet flagged, but certainly would. I found that Victor had listed a dependent on his taxes for the past 3 years. A child. Under his other name. I found, through a property search Patricia's associate ran, that the Scottsdale house had a second mortgage taken out 8 months ago. The proceeds had been moved in partial transfers into the account with $58,000. He was consolidating. He was preparing. Patricia confirmed what I had suspected. Victor's exit timeline was November. He intended to leave before year's end after the secondary mortgage had cleared, after enough funds were in the Marin account, and almost certainly after he had somehow ensured that the contested ownership of our house would not slow him down. The forged quitclaim. He had needed my signature off the deed before he disappeared. I sat with that knowledge for a day and a half before I could speak about it without my voice going flat. On a Wednesday evening, Victor came home early and suggested we take a long weekend trip. He mentioned a place he'd been reading about, a small resort town, somewhere remote, 4 hours north. He said we needed a reset, some time away from routine. He smiled at me with his whole face and put his hand over mine on the table. I recognized, in that moment, the exact shape of what he was doing. A secluded location. No neighbors who knew us. Just the two of us, far from anything. He sensed that something had shifted in our house, maybe in me, maybe in some invisible architecture of a marriage that was no longer real, and he was trying to reorient himself. Or he was accelerating. I looked at his hand over mine, and I said, "That sounds really wonderful. Let's do it." He squeezed my hand and smiled and went to go shower. I texted Patricia from the bathroom. He suggested a remote trip. Same scenario as in the documents. She texted back within 3 minutes. "We're moving tomorrow. Are you ready?" I typed back, "Yes." I had never meant a word more completely in my life. Thursday morning, Victor left for what he said was a half day at the office. He was going to come home at noon and we'd pack and leave by 2. He was relaxed and almost affectionate at breakfast, the way he used to be, early in our marriage, before the distance settled in and I stopped wondering why. At 9:45, Patricia arrived. She had with her a detective from the county sheriff's department, a woman named Reyes with close-cropped hair and a very quiet manner. There was also a forensic accountant, a man who said almost nothing and went directly to the kitchen table with a laptop and a portable scanner. By 11:15, they had photographed and documented the contents of the gray toolbox. The detective took the burner phone into evidence. The accountant had run a preliminary trace on the Marin accounts and flagged 2 transfers that connected directly to wire fraud violations. At 11:53, Victor's car turned into the driveway. He came through the front door smiling, saying something about the drive being clear. He was wearing the blue jacket I had bought him 2 Christmases ago. He had his travel bag already in his hand. Then he stopped. He looked at the detective. He looked at Patricia. He looked at the man at the kitchen table. And then he looked at me, standing near the window with my arms crossed, and something in his face shifted through several different emotions very rapidly before going completely, carefully blank. The detective introduced herself. Told him they had a warrant. Told him there would be questions about documents related to a fraudulent property transfer, a secondary identity, and accounts maintained under a different name. Victor was very still. He looked only at me. Maya. His voice was low. Even. The voice he used when he wanted me to feel like I was overreacting. Can we talk about this privately first? I shook my head. There's nothing to talk about. Whatever you think you found. I know what I found, Victor. My voice came out steadier than I expected. The toolbox, the passport, the Scottsdale lease, the forged deed with my name on it. Roy saw it too, which is why you fired him. Which is why he left me a note behind the fuse box panel instead, because he was more decent than you gave him credit for. Victor was quiet for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, calculation first, then something else. Almost like relief, actually, as if a weight he'd been carrying had finally been set down. Detective Reyes asked him to come with her. He went without a scene. That surprised me, and then it didn't. Victor was always better at cutting losses than at fighting. It was one of the things I used to admire about him, back when I thought it was a professional quality rather than something much more personal. At the doorway, he paused and looked back at me one last time. He didn't look angry. He looked, if anything, like he was trying to work out where he'd made his mistake. As though this were a math problem with a solvable error somewhere. You've been planning this for weeks, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was almost respectful. You taught me to pay attention, I said. I was a good student. He nodded once, slowly, and then he walked out. Patricia stayed another hour to walk me through the next steps. The criminal fraud case would be handled by the county DA's office. The civil case, the divorce, the asset recovery, the voiding of the fraudulent quitclaim would begin within the week. The property records would be corrected. The hidden account was already frozen pending investigation. She also told me something I hadn't expected. Roy had agreed to give a statement. He had seen the documents in the toolbox months ago while he was running cable behind the garage shelving and had been trying to find the right way to tell me ever since. He left the note because he was afraid of what Victor might do if he confronted him directly, and he was afraid I might not believe a stranger over my own husband. He had hoped I would find it in time. I asked Patricia if she could pass along a message to Roy for me. Just thank you. Just that. I sat alone in my house after everyone left. The afternoon had gone golden again, the same way it had the day I'd first found the note. The house was very quiet. I walked through the rooms slowly, the kitchen, where I'd kept making him dinner, the living room where he'd sat reading in that armchair, the garage where a gray toolbox had been sitting for 3 years like a loaded gun waiting to go off. I went out to the backyard and stood in the garden for a while. The tomatoes were coming in. I had planted them in April, staked them carefully, watered them every other day. They had nothing to do with Victor. They had always been entirely mine. I thought about Caroline in Scottsdale. I had her phone number. Patricia had located it through property records. I had not called her yet. I didn't know if I would. I didn't know what I would say. She might have known about me. She might have known nothing at all. Either way, she had a 5-year-old son who was about to find out that his father lived a double life. Whatever I felt about her, Eli had done nothing wrong. He was 5 years old and gap-toothed and had his father's eyes. I decided I would let Patricia handle that conversation. Some things didn't need my voice on them. What I kept coming back to was Roy. A man in his 60s who fixed electrical panels for a living and who had seen something he shouldn't have and been fired for it, and who still quietly, carefully, at his own risk, had tried to get a warning to me. He had tucked a piece of paper behind a fuse box panel and hoped. That was all he could do, and it had been enough. I thought about that for a long time. The way small acts of decency can hold up entire structures. The way the right person paying attention at the right moment can change everything. Victor's bail hearing was set for Monday. Patricia expected it to be denied, given the flight risk, the second passport, the consolidated accounts, the Scottsdale property. He had built himself a very clean exit. It just hadn't gone in the direction he planned. That night, I ordered takeout and ate at the kitchen table alone and watched the evening news and went to bed before 10. I slept for 9 hours straight, the first full night of sleep I'd had in almost 3 weeks. And when I woke up, the sun was already fully up, and the birds outside were very loud, and the house felt entirely different. Lighter. Like a window had been opened in every room at once. I made coffee. I went out to the garden. I picked 3 tomatoes that had finally come fully ripe and brought them inside and sliced them and ate them standing at the counter with just a little salt, the way my grandmother used to make me when I was small. They were good. They tasted like something I had grown myself, in soil I had tended, on a piece of ground that was entirely, completely, and legally mine. Whatever came next, the court dates, the depositions, the paperwork that would unspool for months, I was ready for it. I had learned something about myself over the last 3 weeks that I suspected I had always known but never had to use. That I was not the kind of person who falls apart. That I was, in fact, exactly the kind of person who pays attention. Victor had taught me that, in his way. I was almost grateful. Almost.